this money is being sent there specifically to fund terrorism. And that's not necessarily the case.
That's true. Yeah.
It's just that individuals have been sending money there, and by default, it's more than likely 9 times out of 10, a certain percentage is going to land in the hands of these terrorists. And so you back up and you look at that particular issue, and you have to ask the question: okay, can we do anything? Do we do anything about it from the standpoint of there isn't anything specifically inherently wrong with an individual sending money overseas to family. However, the byproduct and unintended consequence of that is that it's ending up in the hands of terrorist organizations, most likely.
Just a quick break from the program. I need to share with you in urgent manner about scam gold IRAs and the important need to make sure that you're working with a trusted company in the precious metal space. I have had hundreds of people come to me now where they have lost 50, 60, 70% of their life savings in these scam gold IRAs. We are having nearly 100% success rate getting their money back. If you have put your life savings into a gold IRA, I implore you to look and see if you have been scammed. Don't trust the company that sold it to you. Make sure you understand what you can get as a buyback value for the gold or silver that you have in your IRA. If you have noticed a significant drop in what you invested, you have more than likely been scammed. We can help you, and there's no shame. Go to sarahwestall.com/Miles Franklin, fill out that form, and we will help you get your life savings back. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have commentator Jon Justice coming to the program. He is an expert on what's happening in Minnesota with the Somali situation, and actually with the international networks and the money laundering that's going on within that community. And first I want to stress that this is not a racism conversation. I think that racism has been weaponized, and the fact that we aren't able to acknowledge that there's some things going on and that we can't get to the bottom of money laundering and crime that could actually undermine our national security is just ludicrous. And when you hear the details of what's really going on in those communities, you start to think, what the heck? Why is this being allowed to happen for so long? I did a Substack article, and I was just on Dave Janda's show, and you can hear that on my Substack at sarahwestall.substack.com. I'll have a link directly to that if you want to hear it, because I'm from Minnesota too, and so I've been following this for a while, and you can hear the different areas of concern from that community. And Jon has been following it probably even deeper than I have been, as far as the details of the fraud and kind of the jaw dropping. He thinks that by the time this is all said and done and all this information comes out, we're going to be talking about $6 to $8 billion worth of money that's being funneled and stolen out of Minnesota. That is significant amount of money from a state like Minnesota. And then I asked him, how big is this? What are the implications for the country at large? And how does this show the patterns of criminal activity and NGOs and laundering? And I mean, he's in line with me. This is massive. This shows you more of a pattern of criminal behavior that, and I say at the end here, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. If we really want to get to the bottom of crime and these criminal networks that are really harming our country, this should be a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't be a Republican Republicans are trying to fix it and Democrats aren't, or Democrats are fixing certain things and Republicans are bigots and racists. I mean, this is ridiculous. We need to get past, and we talk about that a lot in this conversation. There's some things going on in the Somalian community that Democrats would normally pay attention to if they really believe their own rhetoric. Like girls, that 98% of girls in Somalia get the female mutilation, genital mutilation. That should be a hot button issue for Democrats. But when it comes to that community, they ignore it as if it's not happening. And there's evidence, documented evidence, that girls are being shipped back to the country and that it is happening quietly in the neighborhoods on a documented regular basis. And they're ignoring that. That kind of stuff is not acceptable. And how is this happening? And it's because we have these political rhetoric camps that are so fired up and are so, they've lost their minds, and we're not able to have these kind of conversations. I tend to speak plainly. And because I speak plainly and I just say it like it is, I tend to offend a lot of people. I don't mean to offend people. I'm just like stating things plainly. I'm not sugarcoating things. And I'm realizing that a lot of my words are censored. Though these trigger words, if I framed it like a academic kind of thing, then it's not censored. But if I say it plainly where regular people can understand it, then I'm censored. And that's wrong. That's the censorship regime right now. You have to you have to couch things in academic terms so you're not censored, but you can say the exact same thing. And that's wrong. We should be able to say things plainly. And for example, you can't use the word globalist, but you can say that powerful institutions are having international influence at at incredibly high levels. Or you can say something like that, but I can't say globalist. You know what I mean? Say, come on, that just cuts to the chase. But I can say it in an academic way. That's a kind of BS censorship that we need to get rid of. But anyways, I think you'll appreciate this conversation that I have with Jon Justice. He's very informed on what's going on in the Somalian communities. I also bring up the recent comments by Donald Trump, and I got his intake on it. I don't like anybody being referred to as garbage because it's not appropriate, it's wrong, and you never associate that term to a whole group of people. It's just not appropriate. But then again, there are things that are going on, and we should be talking about it. So if you want to hear more of my commentary on this, go to sarahwestall.substack.com. Again, I'll have the direct link to that article and show I did with Dr. Dave Janda, and it was on his Operations Freedom channel this following weekend. But okay, here is my conversation with analyst and host Jon Justice, who has done incredible work in this area, uncovering these networks and what's really going on. Hi, Jon. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So you're in Minnesota, and you've been tracking the Somalian crime issue for the last, I don't know, many years.
Hmm.
And I wanted to get, I've been covering it as well, but you have really dived into the details of the crime. And I think people will be pretty shocked at how incredible some of this is.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're pretty much a protected voting bloc that doesn't get the scrutiny that they should because they have a lot of power, frankly, in the Twin Cities area. And even to the point where Walz had over 400 people, I understand, bring the attention of the major, Feed Our Starving Children scandal, and he ignored it.
Well, it's really interesting for a lot of different aspects, but it's only just now grabbed national attention. And so from like my perspective, we have new information that came about. The City Journal article that came out about, I think about 3 weeks ago, that Christopher Rufo had done along with, and I forget his first name, Thorpe, basically detailing the allegations of money from fraud via the autism centers going over and potentially landing in the hands of terrorist organizations really brought this all to the forefront. I bring it up because you're right. We've been covering this for a long time on the show, and now it's like we're all watching the rest of the country catch up to what we've known about for so long. And so it's a unique position for me to be in, being a commentator and a host from, yeah, we've been talking about this for a long time, but now everybody's interested, and so now we're getting into it, even further than we did before, if that makes sense. So it's like watching everybody's reaction to something that we've known for a long time has been really, really interesting. But you're right, this is a portion of our population here that really has gone without a level of scrutiny that's deserved. And you're kind of seeing the reason why now, because anybody that brings up the Somali community in reference to this, depending on who you're talking to, you're immediately labeled, a racist just for including the facts of the situation of what we're dealing with. And so I think that's in large part why they've avoided scrutiny for so many years.
Well, I think it's a tactic, right? They're weaponizing racism so that if you ever say anything, now you're a racist. And so
Right.
what's happening is that you're not able to actually look at real crime, and they're getting
Mhm.
away with so many things that you wouldn't normally get away with. It's a really a useful tactic. I'm not particularly happy with the garbage comments, that came
Sure.
out of the administration. I don't think that's helpful because now they're plastering that 24/7 over the news so that nobody talks about it, and then it gives them more weapons to say, if you're going to talk about it, you're a racist, and it's just not helpful.
Well, it's interesting. I agree with you, but let me present you a different angle on that. Okay. Um, if I were advising President Donald Trump, I would have said avoid making those comments, right? That being said, those claims of racism are going to be made regardless. It's so typical when it comes to Trump, regardless of what he says, he's going to criticize for it. Those were a bit over the top. However, one, you're going to have that label anyways, regardless if the president said that. Somebody would be focused on my comments or somebody else's comments, even though mine haven't been nearly as egregious. The one thing that I will say that Trump did accomplish in making those comments, and again, I want to stress, don't support what he said, but what it did enable, it did provide the opportunity for individuals to, in my opinion, feel like they could speak a little bit more freely on the issue. Meaning, Trump went so far into
He
go and make these comments
he
that were over the
blazed
top.
trails.
Right, right. He really did. He kind of laid out a runway for individuals to feel a little bit more confident speaking the truth of what's going on. When I talk about it on the show, it's a really difficult situation to navigate because you need to focus on the culture within the Somali community. Why is this taking place in the Somali community? One thing that I've stressed, and a lot of people have that have been commenting on this, has been, the solution to this is not about anybody's identity. It is not about where they came from, what their religion, what their background is, the color of their skin. The solution is simply upholding the law. But we can't dismiss that 90% of this fraud being perpetuated is happening in one community. Of course, the looking at it from a prosecutorial standpoint and not looking at somebody's identity gets lost in the conversation. Again, the fact that you're simply talking about the Somali community at all is enough for, some people to just go and dismiss your commentary outright.
Well, and then they're not serious people either. If they say
Right.
that this particular community are angels and they don't, that we won't look into any of the crime in this area, that is disrespectful to the people at large, right? It's harmful. Now, I would have a different take on the Trump thing. I would say that we probably did blaze some trails. I don't know if that's a positive or not. However, it did bring a lot of attention to an
Mhm.
issue, right? I'm like, at what cost? I don't know, but it really is important. But I got to say that there's some issues here that actually kind of pisses me off that they aren't looking at, even for their party to be looking at, like the female genital mutilation that's going
Right.
on in that culture that they're overlooking, because 98% of the Somalian girls have that done to them. And it is known, it is active, and it's happening in this community, and they're turning a blind eye. So that is hypocrisy at a massive scale.
Well, and we have large populations of different immigrant communities here in Minnesota. It's not just the Somali community. We have a large
For sure.
Vietnamese community, we have a large Hmong community. But the difference is we're not seeing what we're seeing in terms of the fraud from those other communities. They have their own identities within their community. They have their own businesses that they run, but we haven't seen fraud coming from other immigrant communities like we have this one particular community either. And it creates this, and again, an interesting talking point in just another facet of what we're dealing with that, in my opinion, points to asking the question of why is it so, predominantly in this one community that we're dealing with this fraud where we're not seeing it in other immigrant communities here in the state.
Well, don't you think it also goes back to the clan-based political
Hmm.
structure that they have? And
Right.
that's what people aren't realizing is that it's like the Scottish clans, right? A lot of my heritage is Scottish. does it mean that I'm a bad person because the Scottish people
Right.
operated as a clan? But if you look at the way that that operated, and it still does in many other countries, it is really relevant here because what's happening is these clans are operating at a transnational level. It's not just in Somalia, it's wherever they're at, and it's international, and they reign over any local politics.
Well, and we're hearing that this may have been. It's funny you bring that up really quick. I called it, somebody was talking about the rings within the Somali community, clans rings, pick whatever label you want. And I had labeled it on the show, fraud of the rings, basing it off of Lord of the Rings because of what we were seeing. But there's been a lot of conversation post the recent election for the Minneapolis mayoral race that the reason why Jacob Fry was able to beat Omar Fateh is exactly what you're talking about. There was some clashes taking place within different factions of the Somali community that didn't agree. One faction that supported the current mayor, Jacob Fry, and the other that supported Omar Fateh, because it was assumed going into the race that all of the Somali community would be going for Omar Fateh, and then they didn't. And this is when what you're speaking to started to get attention because we hadn't talked at all, to be honest with you, about the different, rings, factions, clans within that community up until the past couple of months when all of this stuff started to blow up. It hadn't even been part of the conversation.
Well, and it's really relevant because those power structures are in other countries and supporting other agendas. And so
Mhm.
when you start tracking the money trail going out of this country to I don't know what else. They're saying ISIS backed groups and some terrorists are and undermining our national security. That becomes pretty serious, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, no, it really does, and it underscores the importance of what President Donald Trump is doing. With his, I call them deportation correction efforts, because for me, it really is correcting what happened over the course of the past 4 years. And it's frustrating because everything that we're talking about, it's a lot easier to get into the nuances in a format like this. And I know you realize that. When I'm doing the radio show, I'm stuck in these blocks and I've got to make it palatable and all of this. So it's, I'm glad to be on with you today that we can kind of unpack this further. But it's difficult because it is a very complex issue, and yet all we're seeing at the surface level is just the pushback from the activist organizations, the Democrat politicians, to any activity relating to ICE, when in reality, what it is they're attempting to root out in enforcing the law is exactly what you're talking about. It is that aspect of the criminal part within the community and those that have immigrated here that doesn't get discussed. And yet, the activists are just trying to make a name for themselves, bring in dollars, wield more influence. And this type of commentary and conversation gets lost in the shuffle in the wake of all of that propaganda.
Well, and the DOJ reports, the FBI reports
Mhm.
show that there has been an outsized recruitment level going into ISIS from Minnesota
Yeah.
that is larger than any other state in the country. I mean, it's pretty serious that we look at this. Now, that doesn't mean the entire Somalian community
Mm-mm.
are. That's why I brought up the female mutilation. If you gave a crap and we looked at these people like people instead of a voting bloc that has power, you'd be caring about these young girls that are being mutilated. That's why I get angry with the hypocrisy, because it's like you're ignoring the crime and then you're not caring about the true victims that are in that community.
Well, and it's so frustrating because even today I heard different commentary from separate sources. One from the Minneapolis Times, David Schultz, the Hamlin professor. He's kind of the go-to guy for local media here when it comes to anything politically related. And they both were taking this separation stance of, this is really, when it comes to the fraud, really just about what the DFL has done in these programs, the corruption and allowing it to happen. And again, dismissing completely the Somali community aspect of it. But the problem is that what you mentioned, enforce the law to hold people accountable, but focus on who's perpetuating it. Because if you don't, it's just going to enable the bad elements of those community to feel like, hey, we've been getting off on this all along. And even in the middle of this gaining nationwide attention, they're still not going and pointing to us specifically. And so what does that do to an individual's mindset that already has a penchant for wanting to do crime? It just makes me feel like, well, you know what? If I'm not going to be criticized over this, I guess I don't have anything to worry about. I'll continue on with the way that I've been, conducting myself, whether it's within the children in that community or within the fraud that's being perpetuated through these taxpayer-funded programs.
Yeah, I mean, if you ignore the crime to the point that they have, where Walls ignores 400 plus employees saying something, where girls are being mutilated, where criminal, funds are being siphoned out, and they get to the point where they're so emboldened, you have a problem that's larger than we
Yeah.
should, right? I mean, they're creating this monster.
Well, yeah, and even there was I had a listener that shared this with me today. They work in the medical field for Park Nicollet, right? Health Partners Park Nicollet. And they have their own policies of staying neutral on all these issues. And yet they're putting out press releases, memos and emails to their employees talking about the racism within the community because of the ICE raids taking place and how it's isolating to certain communities. I mean, they're taking a political stance on this. And so it speaks to this conditioning that we've seen from so many various entities that vow that they're going to stay politically neutral, and they should. Is he talking about the healthcare industry? And yet they're not. And so, what does that do to individuals who are just paying attention to this on the surface level when they hear from a trusted individual or a trusted entity like a healthcare provider that's saying the same things as the activists are or Democrats are? I mean, it just reinforces all of this wrong mindset relating to tackling this issue. It perpetuates that false narrative that's coming from Democrats right now.
Well, if you listen to the media, it is 24/7
Mhm.
that they're being abused and that they're being attacked. And then the Trump comments are playing as if it's on this rotating wheel. So if I was, and I listen to NPR because I want to hear the different perspectives. So I listen to all sides and so I can be informed. And I can tell you, if I was not hearing and not doing my own investigative work and that I was just in that bubble, you could really sway a lot of people to think that they were
Oh, yeah.
being attacked. And and there are situations that maybe the ICE and the government needs to look and say, okay, how are we doing this where there are situations where we're being abusive, and where is it that and how do we communicate this better? But it's not good to just simply say that it's all bad, right? I think there's
Right.
nuance that's missing in these conversations that are making it to the point where we're not taking care of crime.
Well, and the way the activists go and portray any sort of altercation that the community has with ICE, it diminishes the possibility of getting to an actual event wherein ICE may have overstepped its bounds. Listen, I support immigrations and customs enforcement just like I support law enforcement, but nobody's perfect, and these entities aren't perfect, and mistakes get made all the time. But the way the activists and the protesters continue to deal with all of these different raids taking place, they're the ones causing the chaos to the point where every little individual thing that happens is an up in arms, four alarm fire moment when they're not. And so if there is something egregious that may have taken place via ICE enforcement, it gets lost in all of it. Nobody pays attention to any of it anymore. It becomes white noise. For those that support ICE, it becomes white noise. And for those that don't support ICE, they just believe that all of what they're doing is wrong. It's interesting, too, because the media takes this, the local media in town, and at this point, it's become so automatic. I've been doing radio now for going on 30 years. I used to when I worked in Tucson before I was here, we were partnered with a radio station. And so I was able to get in on some of those production meetings and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to get that background. And the way the media frames these stories, depending on the circumstances, it's crazy. Like if you see an individual who got busted for a DUI, and let's say they had a family. Let's say it was an only father and only mother. They got busted for a DUI. the news outlet's not going to go and focus on the children in regards to that. They're going to say, you know, an individual was busted for a DUI and whatever, if it ends up being newsworthy. And yet, with the circumstances surrounding the ICE raids, suddenly now the kids are front and center in all of this. Oh, and a children was involved, even though the person that ICE was going to arrest was a registered sex offender. But they still play it up like, oh, and the poor children are left without a father. Well, that happens all the time. And I don't even think the media realizes like that innate bias that just gets injected into the storytelling that really does create these narratives within these situations that ends up bolstering a lot of the arguments against the enforcement that's been taking place.
Yeah, that's why I have a hard time. I have to turn it off every so often. And both sides I do when it gets extreme, when they don't hear the nuance. I have to turn it off and go, oh my God, this is so bad. Because exactly what you're saying is when they're protecting a pedophile at the expense of the children, but protecting a pedophile so they can forward their agenda, it is extremely frustrating for those of us that understand what's really happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I
Well,
mean, that's beyond the pale.
well, yesterday, and I know I keep referring to my show, but I just talk about this
No,
stuff
that's
so
good.
often, so it's just it's sort of just a bit of a crutch of mine. But I there was two different stories that broke over the weekend. There was a situation at Augsburg University where there was an individual that was taken in by ICE, and then there was a Burnsville raid by ICE, and these were just kind of one-shot stories the news had covered heading out of the weekend, and I made note of it because I'm like, you watch, both of these stories are going to end up becoming political hot buttons. And sure enough, they did. Now, the Augsburg University story was interesting because you had faculty members pushing back on ICE going and arresting this individual. And so all of these statements put out, you know, pushing back against law enforcement, what they were doing. And I waited to get all the information before I dove into it on the show. And it turns out the individual that was arrested was an illegal immigrant and was also a sex offender. But that never gets the follow up within the media from the initial story. And the Burnsville raid, something similar had taken place. There was somebody that was renting out rooms in their home, didn't do either knew that they were harboring individuals that were here illegally or just didn't do their due diligence in renting out that room, and therefore that individual had a criminal background record and was arrested as well. But if you look at the initial stories as they were written, the aspect of the background of the individuals that were arrested was never covered, you know, when it comes to that story. And so you just feel like, you know, ICE is just out there arresting all these individuals and these are, you know, good people just trying to make a better life, when in reality it goes beyond them just being here illegally. They had gone and conducted other crime, but it's just not the story that you get in your regular media.
From the program to share with you something amazing. This is called Sloop. It's actually SLUPP-332, but it's been shortened to Sloop. And this thing mimics exercise. It seems too good to be true. I first shared this on my Substack, and I had Dr. Diane Kaiser, and we went through all the benefits of this, and the whole thing sold out. You can't get it anywhere really across the industry. And the people who are using it the most are athletes and bodybuilders and people who want to see extra performance in athletics, because this and preclinical studies with mice increase their endurance by 70% and their distance by 45%. I mean, it's incredible. And it's been shown to mimic exercise even when you're at rest. In preclinical studies with obese mice, they lost upwards of 12% of their body weight in 4 weeks, and it increased muscle. So this is really taking the industry by storm. It's actually not that expensive either. With my 10% coupon, it's about $80 for maybe a 2-month supply if you take 1 capsule a day. If you decide to up it to 2 capsules a day, because your dosage depends on what you want, then it's a 1-month supply. But Dr. Diane recommends doing 1 capsule a day until your body gets used to it. You might not see the same level of results right away that the mice did, but your body can get used to it and see if it's something that you really want to do. If you are interested in this, I will have a link below so you can try it yourself, or go to sarahwestall.com under shop. Remember to use the code Sarah to save 10%. You know, if we're not able to get at the nuance, we're not able to solve problems, right? Because we do have an issue with employees. You know, a lot of businesses need these employees. And if you don't address what's really happening, you have all these businesses doing human trafficking, taking advantage of these people. I'm not saying all businesses, but it opens a vacuum to allow that to occur. And because we're not allowed to talk about the nuances of this,
Yeah.
we enable the criminal activity of human trafficking. We enable the criminal activity of, businesses abusing these vulnerable people. And then we're also enabling bad actors to come into this country and send money back to their countries. So it's like both sides are losing if we can't have these conversations.
Well, the good news is there are platforms like yours. And the way the media is changing and how people are receiving their news has changed dramatically. People watching the news is a lot less, people are watching the news a lot less. A lot more people are turning to social networking platforms to get their news. And not to say it's all perfect there, right? We're talking about citizen
Not,
reporting, right?
yeah,
Not at
it's
all.
not
But
perfect, but yeah.
you are seeing more and more voices out there that are speaking truth. Now, that requires individuals to make sure they do their own due diligence, which is tough. But that is to say that, I try to be optimistic about these things because I agree with you. One of the biggest talking points that I've had on the show for a number of years is exactly what you're talking about. All the conversations we are not allowed to have, right? That's the problem, is that so many of these conversations we simply are not allowed to have. The Somali one is another one. We're just simply not allowed to have that conversation because of political reasons and everything that we already talked about. But the good news is that there are more and more platforms that are gaining a lot more viewers where they are seeing the details and the nuance. I mean, the fact that you and I are having this conversation and getting into it is a part of that. Now, is that going to be enough in the future to change things, to sway elections, to kind of bring us back to some sense of civility or sanity within our politics? I don't know. I'd like to believe it is, but I leave that up to God. We'll see what he has. We'll see what he has in store for the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, but there's a certain point where are we crossing the red line where the ignoring this becomes such a problem for our country that it's almost stupidity, right?
Mhm.
Are we so blinded by our political rhetorics and our camps that we're enabling some pretty serious things to go on? Sending money, traffic, laundering money through NGOs that are supposed to help people and sending it back to possibly terrorist organizations.
Right.
I mean, really? And then what else is this community? I had some indigenous folks that follow me, and I've had some really impassionate people. You would think because they're aligned with the left, right? You would think they would be, but they're just impassionate telling me, Sarah, when they brought all these people, when the settlers came and took our lands, this is how they're talking.
Okay.
Gave me a different perspective. I'm like, oh, okay. When the settlers took our land back, hundreds of years ago, they didn't come to not take over. And people were so naive and they took our homeland. This isn't any different than the Somalians coming now. And we have to be careful. And I was just, I kind of sat back and I thought, wow, this is somebody who is these people are indigenous people trying to educate me on how to look at this community. And those people are the ones that the Democrats seem to be aligned with. It was just a very this is what I'm talking about, nuance and being smart about how we do these things. And also we have zip codes and school systems inside Minnesota where the threshold, the tipping point where you bring in more than 30% of any culture, I don't care what culture it is. It doesn't matter what culture. It changes, they take over and it changes the dynamics
Mhm.
of the local community. And sociologists know this, and we just blindly are moving forward and not paying attention.
Well, and hopefully all of this is a wake-up call so that people can begin to discuss this. And when you think of the average individual that's watching all of this, I mean, these are difficult things for me as as sort of a seasoned radio host for me to navigate. Now, I know where my heart is. I know what my commentary is going to be, but you still have to choose your words,
That's right. That's right.
appropriately, right? Because you don't want to be misheard. You don't want to speak out of turn. for the average individual to tackle this stuff that's never dealt with being in the public spotlight or any scrutiny of, I mean, that's a really, really hard thing for people to deal with. So hopefully the conversation helps in that. But let me add something though, because it's interesting. You mentioned, the nuance aspect of it and the money going over to potentially fund terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Well, let's just talk just for give me 90 seconds on this because you want to talk about nuance. Well, think about it from this perspective. There's remittances. We know that there's remittances that have been going into Somalia from Minnesota for a long time. People just sending money back to individuals that are living there because of the dynamics in Somalia, how they don't have really a central organized government, and those terrorist organizations really kind of run the
Yeah,
show
because
there.
just want to throw this in. Their state has really been declared a failed state since
Yeah, right.
1991.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if anybody wants sort of a real easy snapshot, go watch Black Hawk Down, right? Just watch the beginning of the opening scenes of Black Hawk Down. You get a bit of a sense of what's going on over there. My point being that I don't want to see my taxpayer dollars through this fraud going and landing in the hands of terrorists. But at the same time, there is a perception given out that this money is being sent there specifically to fund terrorism. And that's not necessarily the case.
That's true. Yeah.
It's just that individuals have been sending money there, and by default, it's more than likely 9 times out of 10, a certain percentage is going to land in the hands of these terrorists. And so you back up and you look at that particular issue, and you have to ask the question: okay, can we do anything? Do we do anything about it from the standpoint of there isn't anything specifically inherently wrong with an individual sending money overseas to family. However, the byproduct and unintended consequence of that is that it's ending up in the hands of terrorist organizations, most likely. So once you kind of have the fuller picture and you get into the nuance, then you can begin to address the issue if it's even an addressable issue.
Well, I think that's why the nuance is so important to say, okay, how do we make sure we stabilize communities? How do we make sure we respect the communities that are there already? And then how do we make sure that the crime doesn't, I mean, we don't want to, they have to follow the local laws,
Right.
period, end of story. And then how do we make sure that we aren't being naive and allowing these cells to come in, right? I mean, it's different. Okay, now let's look at like the Mexican community, although there's the whole nother thread with the Mexican cartels and
Sure.
all that. Okay, but putting that aside, most of the workers that come in do remittances and send money back to their family to support their family. That is the majority situation. It's probably the majority situation with Somalia and other communities as well. But that doesn't mean that you don't dissect it and go, okay, where are the criminal drug trafficking elements in these communities?
Right.
Where are the terrorists my husband's from Mexico, right? So my kids are half, Mexican. So I can talk about that without it being, I should be able to talk about it because it's real, right? But the majority of the people, they're right. The majority of the people are just great. Like the Somalians, they're very respectful, they're hardworking, they're entrepreneurial. Most of them are just good people wanting a family. But that doesn't mean you don't look under the hood and say, okay, where are these elements that are putting our whole community at risk?
Well, and it's similar to the situation regarding illegal immigration, because I agree with you. And whenever anybody makes the argument, I'm not saying that you did, I'm just going to set up my scenario. I've done
No,
this on the air a
that's
bunch.
fine.
So whenever anybody makes a comment like the majority of individuals coming in from Mexico are just doing so to better their lives, my counter to that is, well, not the majority, all of them are. Almost everybody that's coming in from our southern border is doing it to better their lives. The question is, how are they going to be bettering their lives? Are they doing it to come take advantage of everything that America has to offer, even though they may have come here illegally? Are they here just to simply work hard and send money back to their family, or just to live here and support their family? Or are they doing it through drug trafficking? Are they doing it through human trafficking? So that's the argument that I always use relating to border enforcement when people want to
That's
say,
a great comment.
when they want to talk about how we're really being insensitive to the individuals that just want to better their lives. Is that, yeah, but you're missing the point. The point is that you cannot discount the individuals that are coming here also to better their lives through crime. And so I see something very similar taking place within what's happening right now within the fraud and the Somali community here. Now, it's obviously a much different scenario because we're not talking about the ability of people just to come across a southern or northern border. You're talking about somebody who actually has to physically travel here, hopefully come through customs and that. So, how do you deal with that same issue? And that's really what we're faced with. A group of individuals that have immigrated to the country, all of whom want to go and better their lives. However, there is a portion of that community that is doing so through this really egregious organized level of crime that's resulted in more than likely billions of dollars in fraud going up in smoke here in Minnesota. And I guess that ends up being the question, the whole reason why we're even talking today in the first place.
Well, they have over 100, 107, 110,000 Somalians in our area and in the Minnesota area, and about 300 to 500. I don't know the exact numbers in the country at large. So this is a hot spot of that group. But you brought up something about the Black Hawk Down so people can see it in the failed state in 1991. They get propaganda too. Other countries are propagandized, have different perspectives too. There are groups that wanted to get out of a war-torn country because we had huge efforts to bring in paid federal programs, local programs, paying churches and organizations to bring in Somalians to get out of this war-torn country, right? It was a bleeding heart kind of situation. We need to help people who are suffering in these war-torn countries.
Sure.
Now, they have propaganda too. And when their country was taken down in 1991, part of the local rhetoric and international rhetoric in their communities is the U.S. is evil, and they're the reasons that our country has been destroyed and is in the mess it's in. That is true statement. They are getting propaganda like that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know there's nuance there as well. But that is spurring a lot of the behavior that we're seeing, and we can't ignore that, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that we can't ignore, and we have to look under the hood and say, wait a minute here, guys. We're bringing in a community of people that have been trained to think that we destroyed their country.
Right.
So what does that mean?
Well, and when you think about, I want to see, because I haven't seen it yet. I want to see the data of the increase in the influx of those coming into Minnesota, the Somali community. Because you're right. I mean, we have the largest concentration here in the US, as far as I know. And when you look at all the economic data points that just came out a couple of weeks ago, the only one where Minnesota was in the plus category was in terms of population growth. That wasn't population growth of individuals coming in from neighboring states. We actually had a record number of people leaving the state. The only reason we had that population growth was because of immigration. Now, not just from Somalia, but other places as well, but predominantly from Somalia. So the question that I have is, okay, when did we see that uptick? When you start and go back and look at feeding our future and the fraud that was taking place, and nobody's being held accountable, like how much did that contribute? Well, let me put it this way. Did that contribute to an influx of individuals coming in here to Minnesota because of what was taking place of individuals not being held accountable for the fraud that was being perpetuated? So I'm curious to see that data point, to see if there's any correlation whatsoever between the growth in the immigrant community here in Minnesota, and if that parallels at all the growth in the fraud that we end up seeing. And again, it's just another sort of point on this whole issue that I think could be beneficial moving forward as we go to try to tackle this problem.
Well, and we have to get to the point where we can actually communicate these things, because if we are only talking in emotional, triggering political rhetoric, then we're turning our brains off. We're not even doing things that can protect our families, our communities, and our country going forward. We have to have these hard conversations. We have to actually have the hard work to investigate these things. But then we also have to have these nuanced conversations so that we can keep the kinds of behavior that might be tyrannical from I'm I'm more libertarian leaning, so I don't want the tyranny either.
Sure.
But I sure the heck want people to be smart and have the conversations and work to get to the bottom of these problems. But without without us turning our brains off because we're so triggered by all these propaganda outlets.
Well, and what I'm worried about right now in this moment is not in this moment, but in the moment of what we're talking about. What I'm worried about in this moment is how bad is the situation and can it be remedied? Because everything that you're talking about, whether we're talking about the fraud, whether we're talking about what's happening within the community and the children, which also, I'm just as concerned about that as you are. I've talked about that a ton on my show. It's what we're doing to our most vulnerable in this country. It's criminal. It's absolutely criminal.
Yes.
All of this could have been taken care of, in my opinion, if immediately when we saw relating to fraud, when we saw the explosive growth in these programs, if they had see now we're stopping all of them. Now you're seeing like there was the most recent one. Oh, the DHS payments going for disability waivers. They've cut those off starting January 1st. Governor Tim Walz cut off program 14 different funding to 14 different programs because they think they're fraudulent. This is only happening now because of the exposure that we're seeing. If that had happened at the start, if that had happened year over year when it went from $2.6 million and then jumped up 10, 20 million in one year after being consistent the year before, all of this, in my opinion, could have been brought to a head. But it was allowed to fester to the point where those programs get upwards of 100, 200, 400 million dollars before anybody ends up batting an eye. And DHS was, I mean, you mentioned it, those DHS employees, I had DHS employees coming to me throughout this year anonymously. And typically I won't go on the air and talk about it if I don't have a confirmed source. I don't want to bring it up,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
Just my own standards. But once that DHS account that was legitimized, and I know people that have talked to those individuals that run that account that basically were whistleblowing on the Walz administration. I had people that have been coming to me throughout this entire year whenever I brought up fraud prior to everything that erupted over the course of the past few weeks. And they said, Jon, we've been identifying this. We brought it to the attention of our employees and they just simply ignored us. They said, we're aware of it. It's too big to deal with. Don't worry, we're on top of it. It's like we've been doing this for years. And that's what concerns me now is that how bad has it gotten? What are the unintended consequences of this fraud festering and being allowed for as long as it is, even though we're prosecuting people now and dealing with it, when this could have been stopped years ago? And the same thing rings true when it comes to our vulnerable children and what they're doing within the community and allowing them to mutilate their bodies. I mean, that never should have been allowed for anybody under the age of 18. And yet here we are. And what kind of damage is going to be done for generations of those children as well? And that's the part of all of this that just breaks my heart is that it didn't need to happen. If somebody just stopped it to begin with, we wouldn't even be here.
That's right. And that's why we think that a politician or people running these organizations have integrity and are going to do it on their own. Why aren't you, when you're getting flagged, why aren't you doing what's right? Yeah. Why does it take us in the media, which are censored, by the way, that's why censorship is really, really needs to stop. But why does it take the media to have to make a big deal out of it and do lawfare and embarrass you and smear you across the board before you do what's right? I mean, what the heck is that?
Well, and what was the thinking? So you have individuals within the Walz administration that are made aware of what's going on. They ignore it. And so the conventional line of thinking is that, well, they're worried about calling it out because they're worried about upsetting their base or they're worried about being called racist themselves. Okay, well, that's not an excuse. You and I know that's not an excuse. But what was the expectation? That this was just going to continue? That it wasn't going to hit a breaking point? Like it was unsustainable. So were you just like looking at a ticking clock and just waiting for the bomb to go off? And maybe they were. Maybe they assumed that when the bomb went off, they'd have enough shielding from local media, that they wouldn't get this national scrutiny that we're receiving right now. And even if they did, like we're seeing, it would be more of a, that stance of Republicans pounce. Oh, it's just individuals on the right that are making a big deal about this, because that's kind of what we're seeing. And that's the part of it that just has me scratching my head. It's like, what did you think was going to happen if you guys were aware of all of this? At what point were you going to say something, or did it just not matter? Because there were those that believe that it's baked into the system, and I haven't seen evidence of that. But there are a lot of people out there that believe that these programs were created intentionally to be fraudulent. And I kind of sit back and go, well, you know what? If that's the case, then we're farther lost than I can imagine. But I haven't seen evidence of that. But I understand why people think that.
Well, and money laundering is pretty lucrative, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's a way to make money. And if nobody's looking at it and they can establish these gravy trains, don't you think criminals are going to do that? I mean, yeah. And so maybe it is on purpose because they say, hey, nobody's paying attention. Let's establish this because we can funnel out millions without anybody even looking or batting an eye.
Well, and even when you have individuals that get held accountable, like there was a couple that was charged with fraud, a jury convicted them of fraud, and then we get this random judge that just goes and overturns the jury conviction and still hasn't provided any sort of real good tangible reason as to why they did that. I mean, you want to talk about frustration within the community of people going, wait a second, now we even expose somebody who's fraudulent, we put him through a trial, a jury convicts him, and it just takes a random rogue judge to go and come and reverse it. I mean, what is happening? And so there's a lot of frustration within the community because of that too, I should say, within the listeners of my show.
Well, but that's why we got to stop all these what do you call it, factions and this warring tribes that we have going on so we can just solve some of these problems. What do you think is going to be the deal with Walz? I think that a lot, he probably has aspirations for being president. Do you think he's going to, and do you think this is even going to harm him?
No, I think he's done. I'm not, I there were so many of us that really thought last year when he was tapped to be VP, like it was that double-edged sword for me and my perspective, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing for my show ever. I can't even believe, right? The other part was, oh my gosh, he's a stone's throw away from the White House, right? It's that dueling, great for commentary, horrible for the country if he gets if they get elected. But we all expected this fraud to come out last year, and it never manifested. We were like, oh my gosh. So if you had talked to me 2 months ago, I would have said, no, he's going to be the nominee and he's vulnerable. I mean, no, as everybody knows, no governor has won a third term after we changed to 4-year terms. And, he's a little bit more damaged because of the exposure that he received prior to all this. But now that this fraud has become a national story, from what I'm seeing, from what I'm reading, because I try to go to those other alternative sources as well, because I want to know what the other side is thinking too. No, the Democrat Party is frustrated. And I think that there's Democrats in DC that do not want him anywhere near 2028. And I think there are Democrats here in Minnesota that are gravely concerned that he is going to get beat next year. Now, the question is, who are they going to get to replace him if they were going to, right? That's the question. And right now, anybody with any sort of name ID that's prominent enough to run for that seat has kind of already gone and announced what they're going to be running for anyways, whether it's Keith Ellison or Peggy Flanagan. Maybe you could see an Amy Klobuchar, do a pivot if he were to become that damaged. But to answer your question, I think it's better than 50-50 that he is not the nominee next year. He's not handling the scrutiny well. Every public appearance that he's done, every interview that he's done since this is broken has been a disaster. And that's not even just from a conservative talk show standpoint. I mean, that's pretty much across the board. He's not dealing with it well. And media here isn't giving him a free pass anymore. I've never seen our local media press corps grill Walz the way they did most recently in asking him the pointed questions, or to actually put up videos showing that he's straight up lying on issues. I mean, Lou Raguse had a video earlier this week taking quotes from both the St. Paul current mayor Melvin Carter and Governor Tim Walz, and basically did a 3-minute video saying how both of their statements were completely inaccurate, just straight up lies. So I think he's incredibly, incredibly damaged right now, and it's going to be very interesting heading into next year to see what his campaign looks like and whether or not if the Democrats try to replace him.
Okay, one last question before we go. How big do you think this Somalian story really is to exposing how these networks work and why they're, how important is it for our country and exposing these networks?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge. I from what I've been told and following the story and what I know, what we're seeing now in terms of the fraud here is really just the tip of the iceberg. When people talk about $6 to $8 billion, I think at the end of the day, that's what we're going to end up seeing. On the national level, there is a systemic problem. I was talking about this morning with Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson. Really, when you go back to the start of the Trump administration, when you look at what was taking place within USAID, when you look at the battle over the Obamacare subsidies, when you look at the USDA and the SNAP benefits, what the Republicans, and they're not all perfect, don't misunderstand, they're not all perfect, I'm not saying that, but what they've been largely attempting to do is to get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse that's been taking place in those programs. And look at the amount of opposition that they faced in doing so. And the same thing rings true for the Obamacare subsidies. So you have a broader systemic problem of fraud in this country in a number of different venues and avenues. And so it's almost like we've all stepped out. I'm a fan of sci-fi movies and the Matrix. It's like, I think right now we're all outside the Matrix. We're really beginning to see the world and the way this stuff has been working. What a lot of us have already known, but never really had the proper information. Now everybody is seeing it. And as we started our conversation, that's why it's been surreal to see the fraud story take off and to see the reaction from people outside Minnesota, because you can't take the stance of, yeah, where you been? Because people didn't know. But from our perspective here in Minnesota, we're like sitting back going, well, I'm glad everybody's waking up. And it's really interesting to watch how shocked you all are. We've been shocked now for years. No, this is heading into next year. I think this is going to be a major, major national story, not just for Minnesota, but for the country as a whole.
Well, I would like to see a bipartisan support for cleaning up the fraud because that's what we need. And I refuse to believe that this level of fraud and these networks is one party against the other. And if we really want to make a difference in our country, we have to clean up these fraud networks.
Well, that's what concerns me, though. How do we get there? Because right now, I'm of the opinion that you can't argue with Democrats currently. I want that too. I mean, we're going to have to.
We have to get there.
Yeah, we are. We have to get there. We're always going to be a center right, center left country going one way or the other, depending on the election cycle. There's no changing that. But right now, there is such this stance of anti-Trump all the time. I mean, does it mean we have to wait until the Trump administration's over and everybody calms down? Is the next, GOP leader going to be met with the same level of angst and animosity, or is this just exclusive to Trump? I think right now with Trump in office, I don't know how we get there. I'm with you. It's something that I pray about every single day, but I don't know how we get there right now with the current state of politics.
I agree. It has to stop, and the adults in the room need to step forward and say, okay, what is this worth? Are we really willing to throw away the future of our country because we can't get beyond these tribal groups and this stupidity, or do we really want to make a difference in this country?
Well, look how Jasmine Crockett launched her campaign for Senate yesterday. It was just a video of her and nothing but Trump saying that she was a low IQ voter. I mean, that's what you're starting your platform off on. I mean, it's Jasmine Crockett, so I mean, you have these personalities within the elected officials, and she's one of those. But still, it's kind of like, is this the world we live in right now? Is this going to be how the approach is just like, I'm the anti-Trump? We're not going to approach any issues, right now. I mean,
So
come on already.
stupid. That's the
Yeah,
shutting your brain off stuff that I'm talking
right.
about. It's
Yeah.
like, come on, guys. Okay, where do people follow you? You are someone that people need to listen to really know some of these details that are going on.
Yeah, so I'm live Monday through Friday, 6 until 9 a.m. Central Time, iHeartRadio app, KTLK Minneapolis. You can just search my name, John. It's Jon Justice. You can follow me on X at Jon Justice, Jon. I'm on the Chinese spyware app. I'm doing videos every day on TikTok, which again, it's a great source for a lot of people. There's a lot of new conservative voices that are out there. So on that platform, you got to add so the Jon Justice on there. But yeah, you can check out the podcast at any time. That's available on the iHeartRadio app too. And it was such a privilege to be on with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me.